When any belief tends to reappear in various races from age to age and under various conditions of civilization and education, it acquires a special interest because it probably depends on some general trait in the mental organization of our species. These words, spoken by Irish psychiatrist Connolly Norman in 1905, underlie one of the most fervent beliefs I have about mythology and folklore, and this is that they contain, in their fantastical, extraordinary, and often meandering depths, some of the deepest insights on what makes us human. Myths and folklore are ubiquitous. Every single human society across space and time has a set of stories which express the knowns and the unknowns of the people. In many cases, whether by diffusion or independent autochthonous arising, the stories are similar enough to invite scrutiny. After all, if a story brought from a foreign land lingers in the minds of a people, it more than likely resonated deeply. And if different versions of the same story arises among disparate and geographically distant peoples, it attests to the universality of the human experience. This is why mythical and folk beliefs have always been of interest to scholars and other such individuals who study the mind. Matter of fact, much of what we consider modern psychology and psychiatry are inextricably tied to and have been deeply influenced by mythical, folk, magical, spiritual, and other such beliefs. Whether you're talking about an Oedipus complex or a generational curse brought on by dissatisfied ancestral or other spirits, the underlying narratives are what spawn, inform, and propagate these beliefs over time. For the month of September, on the Mythological Africans Podcast, we'll be taking a break from our excavation of geomythology from the African continent to probe at the way mythology and folklore intersect with psychology. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Mythological Africans Podcast, where we read and talk about stories from African mythology and folklore. I am your host, Helen Tunde. As many of you may know, I was born and raised in Cameroon, a West Central African country. I was raised Catholic, with very limited exposure to the traditional beliefs of my people. I spent practically all my years in Cameroon, in urban areas, far away from our village. I also love to read. I was one of those kids who almost always had her nose in a book. And now as an adult, my taste bent towards fantasy, science fiction, historical fiction, and the paranormal when I read for fun, and naturalism, psychology, and spirituality, with a dash of the classics here and there when I read more serious books. What this means is that I've had a fair amount of exposure to ideas from around the world. And what struck me about 10 or so years ago and contributed to my desire to create the Mythological Africans platform was the fact that mythology and folklore from all over the world is woven through these fields. In most cases, these myths and folklore have been so thoroughly analyzed and contextualized, they can be used to inform contemporary phenomena, not only in the cultures out of which they emerge, but in the world at large. For example, in the ever-fascinating world of the internet, the word narcissist lurks under just about everybody's tongue, waiting to be lobbed at any and everyone, whether or not it is deserved or appropriate. I want to believe most people who use that word know the Greek myth of Narcissus, but I might be wrong. In the West, some of the most influential scholars of the human mind, Otto Rank, Geza Roheim, Claude Lévi-Strauss, and the immortal Sigmund Freud, hailed as the father of psychoanalysis, produced large bodies of work and many influential, if debated, theories of human behavior based on their analysis of the myths and folktales known to their times. The case has been quite different for African cultures. You will most likely not find references to African myths and folklore in the dominant psychology texts of our times. But this does not mean that Africans have not used what we now call myths and folklore in similar manners. The best example of this that I can think about is that of the Odu Ifa of the Yoruba, found in West Africa and in the African diaspora. The Odu Ifa is a collection of myths, incantations, proverbs, and songs that contain Yoruba ethics and morals, rituals, sacrifices, and spiritual matters, essentially the Yoruba belief system. Much like modern mental health practitioners, Ifa designers use the Odu Ifa to provide guidance and advice to people who seek their help. There are 16 major and 240 minor Odu, or signs. Each is associated with an idea or story. These 256 Odu are further subdivided into verses called Eshe, which can be expanded and revised, making them an ever-growing body of work. Skilled and trustworthy Ifa diviners must be able to recall and chant the relevant verses and stories and advise their clients about what is necessary to secure a favorable outcome for their issue. If that sounds like a lot, it is. Today, you can get the Odu Ifa in a book. Traditionally, Ifa diviners learned the Odu Ifa through a process of memorization that could take up to 30 years. The Odu Ifa is one of many such repositories of knowledge used as a resource by African people. As has been very well documented across the African continent, seers, diviners, storytellers, and other individuals acted as the keepers and dispensers of such knowledge, and they almost always used stories, new and old, to guide people along the path to wholeness. Matter of fact, initiation and other such induction ceremonies which, before modern times and even today, remain important transitions in the lives of many African peoples, are almost always organized around a story. Whether it is that of a young boy braving the unknowns of the forest and ultimately killing the monster that lurks in its depths, or a young girl triumphing over a series of trying situations to ultimately settle comfortable in her marital home. Song, dance, ritual, and accoutrements, all these things involved in these ceremonies, are informed by stories. All this is to say that the idea of myths and folklore informing the work of the people charged with resolving matters of the mind and spirit in African societies is very well established. What is interesting today is that despite the way folk or traditional beliefs influence people's behavior and choices, both on the continent and in the diaspora, there seems to be still a bit of a timidity, at least the way I see it, around fully embracing mythology and folklore from the continent into the fold of material that can truly be plumbed to better understand the subterranean mental architecture of the modern African and leveraged to produce better mental health resources. Never mind that in some places these ideas have seamlessly integrated themselves into the spiritual and cultural ecosystems of Islam and Christianity. It's almost as if people fancy themselves too modern and educated for such superstitions. That is, until life deals out a hand of cards that leaves them completely out of their depth, with neither imam, nor priest, nor pastor able to help in meaningful ways. One might even say that the loss of coherent and relevant stories around which young Africans might organize and demarcate the stages of their lives contributes to a significant amount of the issues plaguing the continent at this time. So I believe that arming ourselves with necessary knowledge makes us less vulnerable to unwanted and unwarranted influence. I do want to emphasize that I'm not advocating a wholesale return to only using stories and ideas from traditional mythology and folklore to inform life and decision making. Not only is that practically impossible, it would also be completely antithetical to what we as Africans believe and practice, even traditionally. In my opinion, it's not emphasized enough how adaptable and open to new knowledge traditional African societies were and still are. Because think about it. People in traditional African societies believe that living well means harmony with the family and the wider community, which usually includes deities, spirits, and ancestors, and today would include everything that modernity and globalization has introduced. What this usually means is that any new understanding of the world which can help better navigate these relationships is welcome. This is why if you look closely enough at traditional African cultural practices, you will see intracontinental and intercontinental influences. The implication, of course, being that we have the freedom, and I might even say the responsibility, to use every tool at our disposal to inform what would make for our well-being. We'll stop here for this week because this is an introductory episode, but we'll continue our conversation next week with what we do and love best here at Mythological Africans: a story and a discussion. Thank you as always for listening, and see you next week.